To everyone watching on the release date of this video, Merry Christmas. Today is the eve of the World Rapid and Blitz Chess Championship, which starts in Warsaw tomorrow, Boxing Day. We've got tons of big guns in action, including the big three, Nakamura, Firouzja and Carlsen, exceptional blitz players. So I'm taking a look back at some of the best games between these guys, and today I want to look at a game played between Nakamura with white and Firouzja with black. So this one was played 3 years ago actually, in 2018. So Firouzja's just 15 years old in this game, and it features an exceptional double Rook Sac. I mean, wait till you see this thing. So we get this kind of offbeat B3 system opening. Hikaru loves to play like this. This is 3-minute chess. Bishop B4, now bishop to B2, castles, knight F3, rook E8, knight to D5 now. You don't really want to be taking here because after recaptures with the pawn, this knight is getting kicked and then you're picking up this pawn. If you try E4 as black, which is possible, it's just not positionally good, opening up this bishop. So that isn't taken. The bishop dropped back to C5 instead. We had queen to C2 here. Again, worth just making a quick note of the fact that you can play a bit more passively with bishop E2 here, and then you might have a line like this with D6, takes on F6, queen recaptures, castles, pawn to A5, and it's just a bit more passive for white. We can see that black's got the pieces out and white doesn't have so much pressure against the king here. Instead, Naka plays in a more enterprising way with queen C2. And the idea, as we'll see, is that after pawn to H6, anticipating threats against this pawn, we had pawn to A3 now. So Naka wants to bring the bishop to D3, but he's first protecting against knight B4. So pawn to A5 now, clamps down on this square. Arguably D6 would have been better here, but not such a bad move. Now we had bishop to D3, pawn to D6, and now Naka decides to simply chop here with check. The queen recaptures and he seeks to improve this bishop now. So it's blocking the D pawn, and he also notes that from E4 it's going to exert more influence over the board. But he first throws in this check, a really nice move, and he's just subtly misplacing the black king here. If the king goes to F8, then it's just a bit misplaced. It could be subject to checks on this diagonal later. And if it goes to H8, as it did in the game, well, now you've weakened the F7 pawn, which could play in later tactics. Plus, it's further from the middle, should we ever reach an endgame. The bishop now drops back to E4, and we had knight to E7 now from Firouzja. Not the most accurate move. Better would have been something like, say, bishop to E6, just connecting these rooks. It's so important to finish development, especially in blitz games, because unprotected pieces drop off. And Naka already had a shot here actually, so after bishop e4, knight to e7, he could have already played b4 here, because after captures, the rooks would be swapped, bishop takes back, and if black takes here, then you get queen a4, and you're hitting both of these pieces, one of them's going to be dropping off. But Naka didn't go b4, really hard to see that of course in blitz. He went pawn to d4 instead, slightly double-edged because you're going to be opening up your king now. We had pawn captures, probably best would have been taking with the knight, and then this is a big threat, either b5 or f5, jumping with the knight, opening up the bishop. So black would have to capture, and this is just a bit better for white, as we can see with these lovely bishops here. But Naka goes for the more double-edged pawn captures, opening up his king, but holding this nice centre. And Firouzja now comes up with the only move in the position to actually keep things kind of tense and balanced. If you want to pause and look for it, I'd encourage you to do so. It's bishop to f5, really great move. So there's a few tactics going on here. Naka correctly castles and just gets his king to safety. But if he had taken here, well, now we have knight takes and it's also check, and you're running into some problems. If in this position you take here, well, now black takes here, and after queen captures, this is pretty good for black. And equally, if you don't take that bishop, but instead take the queen here, then again after black takes, black is doing quite well, because these pawns are looking weak and the king's still in the centre. So we didn't get any of this. Naka correctly castled after bishop f5, And now Firouzja captures that bishop on e4, queen recaptures, and knight to g6. Again, slightly more accurate here would have been bishop to b6, for the big reason that now you can't take on b7 as white, which is what happened in the game, because otherwise the queen is getting trapped in a moment with the rook sliding across. First you'd go pawn to d5, shutting the escape way for the queen, and we'll see this theme later on, and now you're threatening this and it just can't be stopped. So that's why bishop b6 would have been better, but knight g6. The queen now took on b7, and this time it's safe for Hikaru to do so. So he's clearly better now, but can Firouzja drum up an attack against Hikaru's king? We had bishop to b6 now, and here Hikaru goes pawn to b4. It's not a bad move, but probably he should have taken a time out to, say, develop a rook to the e-file, or even improve his queen, say to c6, just preventing d5 now, or else the queens are getting swapped off. But he didn't fully sense the danger, so pawn to b4. Now we had knight into f4 from Firouzja. He brings it to this very dangerous square looking at the king. And now Naka again should play something like queen to c6 or rook f to e1 perhaps. But he goes pawn to c5, looks great trapping the piece, but it is now getting tense for his king. So Firouzja now comes up with an exceptional concept here. He plays pawn to d5, shutting out the white queen from the defense of the knight and the king here. And Hikaru sat there thinking, what is going on here? Free piece, okay. Takes on b6, but let's see this follow up. Knight takes on g2. And even at this stage, Hikaru hadn't fully seen the depth of this idea. So he was calculating king takes, and then he was looking at queen g6, king h1, queen e4 hitting that piece. Now if you come here as white, then black can actually force this draw with this sequence of moves. But what Hikaru actually had here that he'd missed to calculate was this move rook g1. Looks a bit weird to actually play like this, but it is possible in this position. You don't normally like to pin the rook to the king like this. Anyway, this didn't happen. After knight takes on g2, Hikaru didn't take this. He was worried about the draw line, and so instead he played the best move in the position, knight e5. He's covering this g6 square by doing so, and he's saying to black, okay, how do you follow up now? I've got a pawn about to take here, your rook's under fire, what's your next move? And here Firouzja comes up with an absolute corker of a move. He plays rook takes on e5, double rook sacrifice. So now Hikaru sat there thinking, what is going on? He takes this rook on a8 with check, king goes to h7, pawn captures here, hitting the queen, and all he's actually looking at here is queen to g6. Even then, he's forced to give up his queen actually with queen to c6, but that's another story. But after Firouzja plays the more accurate and deadly queen f3, he's now actually winning. He's better here, incredibly, even though he's 2 rooks down. So Hikaru now plays queen takes on d5. There's really hardly anything better. The threat here is to move the knight away and then deliver checkmate. And if you try and cover with, say, the bishop like this, well, now we go knight to h4. There's all sorts of things you can try, but it's just no good. So Hikaru chops here, the queen takes back. Now he tries rook a to d1, queen comes to f3 again, same threat. So he gives another rook, queen captures, and he just cannot get out of this. He takes the pawn here this time, threatening to make a queen, but now knight to f4, and the game is over. Here Hikaru resigned. So why did he resign? Well, there's some big threats. It's either mate in 5 or mate in 3. So if he makes a queen here, for example, well, then we have this checkmating sequence. So queen to g6 check, queen to g4 blocks, only move, captures, king moves, queen g2 checkmate. And coming back here, if you try something like pawn to f3 here, just to give the king some room, well then there's a couple of different ways to checkmate, but here's a nice one. So queen e3 check, if king h1, then we have this sequence of moves. Queen e2, threatening checkmate here, and after the rook covers that square, we just take here with check, blocks, checkmate. And coming back here, if the king doesn't move, if the rook now blocks, well, now we have knight h3 check. King steps up, captures here, and this one's really pretty. So the king's now being forced up the board. Queen takes on f3, king h4, pawn g5, checkmate. Look at that. So an absolute crush of a game from the 15-year-old Firouzja, and hopefully we see more queen sacrifices in this upcoming tournament. If you've enjoyed this game and want to see more like this, then hit here to subscribe, and see another amazing Firouzja crush, click here. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.